The first sign of the anchor's approach was a ripple in the sky, a disruption that caused the once peaceful stars to flicker out of view. It wasn't a meteor shower, nor a cosmic anomaly. It was the first wave of the Ankar fleet, and it was coming straight for Earth. Governments scrambled to issue statements, but the uncertainty in their voices betrayed their fear. News outlets across the world broadcasted images of strange, massive ships, dark and foreboding, hanging in Earth's orbit like ominous clouds waiting to burst. No one had expected this. Earth, a planet unimportant in the grand tapestry of the galaxy, had never been a priority for the more advanced civilizations. Its people were still exploring their own solar system, still bound by limitations of their primitive technology. For centuries, Earth had existed in the shadow of galactic empires, only occasionally glimpsed in the logs of explorers and travelers passing by. They were insignificant, too young, too raw to challenge the established powers of the universe. And the Ankar, the galaxy's most feared race, were no different. They had seen hundreds of planets fall before them. The Ankar were unstoppable. It was just a matter of time before Earth would meet the same fate. The first message from the Ankar was simple, chilling in its calmness. Surrender or perish. Your world will become part of the Ankar Empire. The voice was cold, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the panic surging through Earth's leaders. International summits were held, but no one had an answer. Military leaders proposed immediate retaliation, but without knowing the true scale of the threat. Their plans were nothing more than hopeful fantasies. Earth was no match for the invaders. How could they possibly fight a civilization that had mastered interstellar travel and weaponry far beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed of? In the streets, fear began to take root. People looked to their leaders, hoping for a plan, for something, anything, that would save them. But the silence of indecision was deafening. The world was divided, governments hesitated, and panic set in. It seemed as though the final chapter of human civilization was already being written, and Earth was about to become a mere footnote in the galaxy's history. But there was one thing the Ankar could never have predicted: humanity's refusal to accept its fate. It began as whispers. In small back rooms of resistance groups scattered around the globe, a single question lingered in the air. Do we give up, or do we fight? In the middle of the chaos, an unlikely figure emerged. General Marcus Steele, a former military tactician, had been quietly rallying a resistance for months, long before the Ankar's ships ever appeared. His plans, his vision, had been ignored as conspiracy theories, wild dreams of an impossible fight. Now, he found himself standing in front of the world's leaders, his voice a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. We might not have their weapons, but we have something they'll never understand. Our will to survive, he said, his eyes burning with defiance. Humanity will not kneel. It was in that moment, with a mere handful of defiant voices, that the first spark was lit. The world began to awaken. The fear wasn't gone, but it was replaced with something else, a determination to rise against impossible odds. The first resistance movements formed, small but growing, as humanity came together in defiance of the Ankar's empire. Though no one knew how they would fight, one thing was certain: humanity had decided to make its stand, and the galaxy, for the first time, began to realize that perhaps they had underestimated Earth. The clock was ticking. The world was preparing for war. The silence of Earth's surrender was broken, and the first battle for humanity's future was about to begin. As the days dragged on, the reality of Earth's situation became ever more dire. The Ankar's massive fleet hovered above the planet, unyielding and imposing. Cities lived in the shadow of their presence, and the constant threat of annihilation seemed imminent. But despite the overwhelming odds, humanity's resolve began to grow. The moment of indecision was over. In every corner of the world, from the devastated capitals to the remote villages, people whispered the same words: we fight. It started small. In the underground bunkers of rogue military units, civilians with hidden talents, And even hackers who had once only written code for fun, the groundwork for resistance began. The first acts of defiance were simple: sabotages of communication networks, minor disruptions to anchor ships, and small tactical strikes on supply lines. But these acts, though small, had a ripple effect across the globe. The message was clear: Earth would not surrender without a fight. General Marcus Steele, who had become the reluctant leader of this burgeoning resistance, worked tirelessly to unite the fractured remnants of Earth's military. His voice echoed over encrypted channels to soldiers who had lost all hope, soldiers who once thought they were fighting for a world that didn't exist anymore. Steele inspired them, brought them together, and instilled in them the one thing the Ankar could never have predicted: hope. Survival isn't just about weapons, Steele said to his most trusted commanders during a covert meeting, his voice gritty but steady. It's about hearts that refuse to break. It's about the will to fight, even when the odds are impossible. Meanwhile, across the globe, humanity's finest minds, from scientists to engineers, were secretly working on their own plans. The Ankar had vastly superior technology, but what they didn't understand was human ingenuity. There were no grand armies, no advanced warships on Earth. But there was something else: the ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. The more the Ankar tried to subdue Earth, the more humanity's minds started to find ways around their technology. A scientist in Paris reverse-engineered a broken Ankar drone and discovered a vulnerability in its shielding. A group of hackers in Tokyo learned how to exploit weaknesses in the Ankar's communications network. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. As human ingenuity gave them a fighting chance, the people of Earth began to rally. The resistance took shape, morphing from scattered groups into a unified force. It wasn't just soldiers who fought now, it was everyone. Farmers and teachers, doctors and students, all contributing to the effort in whatever way they could. The message was clear: this was humanity's war. Every person on Earth had a role to play, and no one was too small to make a difference. In the heart of the resistance, a daring plan began to take shape. A team of Earth's best engineers, under the leadership of Dr. Sofia Alvarez, began to work on the unthinkable: a way to turn the Ankar's technology against them. Using what little was available, they managed to hack into a captured Ankar ship, reverse engineering its systems to develop a weapon capable of disabling their shields. It was dangerous, untested, and had a low probability of success, but it was humanity's best shot. As the first small-scale victories piled up, Earth's resistance became more confident. A raid on an Ankar supply depot outside Cairo was a resounding success, taking out vital resources that the invaders needed to maintain their presence on Earth. The resistance had learned to think like their enemies, using guerrilla tactics, creating chaos, and hitting where it hurt the most. The message was spreading. Across the planet, people were beginning to believe. The Ankar were not invincible. They were not gods. They were just another enemy, and humanity was not going to roll over. And then, one day, something happened that shook the Ankar to their core. A small human fleet, cobbled together from captured alien technology and human-made ships, emerged from the shadows of Earth's moon. The Ankar had long assumed Earth had no spacefaring capability. They were wrong. With a single, coordinated strike, the human fleet ambushed an Ankar patrol ship. The battle was brief, but the impact was staggering. The Ankar, who had once considered Earth no more than a blip in the cosmos, now realized they had underestimated their opponents. General Steele, watching the victory unfold on his command screens, allowed himself a rare smile. But it was not a smile of triumph. It was a smile of understanding. The fight was far from over, and the cost of this war would be high. But one thing was certain: humanity had awakened. The resistance was no longer just surviving. They were starting to win. In the war rooms of the Ankar fleet, things were not going according to plan. The first skirmishes had been easy. Human resistance forces were scattered, primitive in their tactics. But as the weeks passed, a shift occurred. The humans were becoming more than just a nuisance. They were adapting, evolving, and fighting back in ways the Anchor had never expected. What began as random acts of sabotage turned into coordinated, strategic strikes against critical infrastructure. It became clear that Earth was not simply a planet to be conquered. It was a challenge that would require far more than the Anchor had bargained for. At the heart of the Anchor Empire, Supreme Commander Xar Kun paced restlessly. His fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable power, had begun to suffer significant losses. His warships, impervious to lesser forces, were now being outmaneuvered by human ingenuity. Their fighters, though outclassed in technology, seemed to have an uncanny ability to predict Anchor movements and strike with precision. The humans were unpredictable, their strategies baffling. They fought with a ferocity that only a species with everything to lose could muster. "I don't understand it," Xar Kun muttered to his council, his voice tinged with frustration. "They should have bowed. Why do they keep resisting?" A lieutenant, her face etched with concern, spoke up. "Perhaps they've realized something we've overlooked, Commander. They have nothing to lose. Earth is their home. Their survival is their fight." Xar Kun's eyes narrowed. "No, this is not possible. We have crushed entire civilizations with far more advanced technology. These humans, they're nothing." But as the months passed, the evidence mounted. The humans' ability to improvise, to adapt in the heat of battle, was proving to be a nightmare for the Anchor. Each victory they claimed, no matter how small, shattered the complacency with which the Anchor had viewed humanity. They had expected Earth to crumble, to bow down to the weight of their empire's might. Instead, they were finding that the humans were not easy prey. On Earth, General Steele knew this was their moment. The Anchor had underestimated them for too long. The first skirmishes, while necessary, had been just the beginning. They needed a move that would send a clear message. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. It wasn't enough to play defense anymore. Humanity had to be bold. They had to take the fight to the invaders. Steele's eyes scanned the battlefield map. The Anchor fleet was large, but it wasn't infallible. Over the last few weeks, the Resistance had gathered enough intelligence to pinpoint weak spots in the Anchor's command structure. They had discovered that, for all their technological superiority, the Anchor had one glaring flaw. They were slow to adapt to unpredictability. And humanity, as it turned out, was one of the most unpredictable forces in the universe. "We've got one chance at this," Steele said to his inner circle, his voice grim but determined. "We hit them where it hurts, right in the heart of their fleet. If we take out their flagship, the rest will crumble. They'll lose control." The plan was audacious. A coordinated strike aimed directly at the Anchor's most powerful warship, the Dreadnought. The ship was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of Anchor dominance, an unstoppable behemoth capable of obliterating entire cities in a single strike. If the humans could destroy it, the psychological impact on the Anchor would be enormous. They had to believe that the humans were willing to die for victory, that they were willing to take risks no other species would. For days, Steele and his commanders meticulously planned the assault. The team that would carry out the mission was small, a handful of the best fighters, pilots, and engineers who had survived the previous battles. Their objective was clear: infiltrate the Dreadnought, plant a series of explosives, and escape before the ship could retaliate. There was no room for error, no second chances. As the day of the attack approached, the mood among the human forces shifted. They were no longer fighting just for survival. They were fighting to send a message to the Anchor, to the entire galaxy. And that message was simple: do not underestimate humanity. On the eve of the attack, General Steele addressed his troops. "This is our moment. No one here will ever be forgotten. The galaxy will know that humanity stood tall when every other species would have fallen. And when the Anchor fleet crumbles, they will know why." The message was broadcast across the world, a final rallying cry for all of Earth's resistance forces. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. People across the planet, soldiers, civilians, anyone who had a stake in Earth's survival, came together in ways they never had before. The fight had become more than a military campaign. It had become the symbol of humanity's defiance, a reminder that even in the face of the most overwhelming odds, they would not bow. The Ankar fleet, still confident in their victory, had no idea what was coming. They couldn't possibly fathom that humanity, the species they had thought so insignificant, was about to deliver a blow that would shake their empire to its very core. The night before the mission to take down the dreadnought, the human resistance was alive with nervous energy. Everyone knew that the upcoming attack was more than just a strategic strike. It was a test of their resilience, of their will to survive. General Marcus Steele stood in the command center, overseeing the final preparations. His face was etched with lines of exhaustion, but his eyes burned with an intensity that spoke volumes. The Ankar believed they were unbeatable. Tomorrow, humanity would prove them wrong. The team chosen for the mission was small but elite. It included Captain Nadia Cortez, a brilliant tactician and fighter, Lieutenant Ethan Ward, a seasoned pilot, Dr. Sofia Alvarez, the scientist who had reverse-engineered the Ankar technology, and Sergeant Kai Tanaka, a former Navy SEAL with nerves of steel. Each one had proven themselves capable in previous skirmishes, and now they were the last hope for Earth. "We don't have a lot of time," General Steele said, his voice sharp and focused. "Once we hit their flagship, the Ankar will retaliate. We'll have mere minutes before their fleet realizes what's happening. But if we succeed, it'll send shockwaves through their entire command structure. The dreadnought is their pride, their symbol of invincibility. If we destroy it, they'll falter. We'll have our opening to strike at the heart of their fleet." The plan was simple, in theory. Using a combination of stealth technology and modified Ankar ships, the team would infiltrate the dreadnought undetected. Once inside, they would plant a series of high-powered explosives in the ship's critical systems. The explosion would disable the flagship long enough for the human forces to mount a counterattack, perhaps giving them a real chance to win the war. But there was a dangerous catch. The team had no guaranteed escape route. The Ankar flagship, like most of their ships, was equipped with cutting-edge security systems. The humans had no real way of knowing how the dreadnought's defenses would react to their presence. If they were detected before the bombs were planted, the entire mission would be compromised, and the consequences for Earth would be catastrophic. At dawn, the mission began. The Resistance's modified fleet, a ragtag group of stolen Ankar ships and makeshift human fighters, launched from Earth's orbit, flying under the radar to avoid detection. The dreadnought loomed ahead, a massive fortress in space, its dark hull reflecting the light of the distant stars. Nadia Cortez, commanding the strike team's ship, looked back at her crew. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. "Steady," she murmured, as her ship cut through the vacuum of space. "We can do this." As they neared the dreadnought, Dr. Alvarez worked quickly to disable the ship's external sensors, using the Ankar tech she had learned to manipulate. The team would need to land silently, unseen, if they had any hope of success. Every second that ticked away felt like an eternity, the weight of humanity's future hanging in the balance. Inside the dreadnought, the crew was oblivious. The Ankar believed their fortress was invulnerable, their power unmatched. The Resistance had done everything they could to stay off their radar, but there was always the possibility that the dreadnought's defenses might detect something. If they were caught, it would be a swift and brutal end to the mission. But Steele had faith in his team. He had no choice. The stealth ships touched down within the belly of the flagship, and the crew silently disembarked. The metallic hallways of the dreadnought felt eerily quiet. The size of the ship was almost overwhelming, its corridors twisting and turning, an endless maze of stark, sterile walls. As they moved deeper into the ship, the humans relied on Dr. Alvarez's expertise to navigate through the labyrinth, heading toward the core of the vessel. Minutes felt like hours. The crew's breaths were shallow, their movements precise as they placed charges on critical systems. Engines, weapons, power cores. Every step was calculated, every corner checked. They knew that discovery was inevitable. The key was to stay one step ahead of the Ankar. But as the final charge was set, the team received a chilling transmission. Lieutenant Ward, manning the comms, stiffened as the message crackled through. "They know we're here," Ward said, his voice grim. Panic flickered in the eyes of the team, but it was short-lived. They had expected this. Steele had anticipated the possibility of detection, and the team had a contingency plan. The mission wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The countdown to detonation had already started. "Let's move," Cortez commanded. "Head for the extraction point. We've got seconds before everything goes up in flames." In that moment, the Resistance knew that if they were to survive, they would need every ounce of human ingenuity and resilience. The Dreadnought was not just a weapon of destruction. It was a symbol of everything humanity had fought against. And today, it would fall, not because of superior firepower, but because humanity had finally learned how to fight back. The silence of the Dreadnought was broken by the sound of alarms blaring across the flagship. It was the warning the team had dreaded, but it was the reality they knew they'd eventually face. The stealth mission had been compromised. The Ankar's superior sensors had picked up the faintest trace of human presence. A flashing red light illuminated the ship's vast corridors as the enemy began locking down every escape route. There was no turning back now. The bombs were set. The countdown had begun. Captain Nadia Cortez didn't hesitate. Her training kicked in as she issued rapid-fire commands, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Move. Now," she barked. The team sprinted through the narrow hallways, their footsteps echoing as they rushed toward the extraction point. They were only moments away from detonating the charges, but escaping the Dreadnought was going to be the real challenge. Every second counted. Lieutenant Ethan Ward, keeping a careful eye on the ship's systems, turned to Dr. Sofia Alvarez, who was hurriedly checking the ship's coordinates. "How much time do we have left?" Ward asked, his face taut with concern. 3 minutes, Dr. Alvarez replied, her voice tight but unwavering. "We've set the charges in the critical sections, but we'll need every second to get back to the ship before the blast." "We're not going to make it that easy," came a voice from the hallway. An Ankar officer, with his gray skin and sharp features, stood at the far end of the corridor, flanked by a squad of armed soldiers. The soldiers' weapons hummed with deadly energy, their expressions cold as they raised their guns. Cortez's eyes narrowed. She didn't hesitate. "Get ready to fight," she ordered. Sergeant Kai Tanaka, always the first to react, pulled out his blaster and fired a quick burst toward the Ankar squad. The bolts of energy struck the metal walls, ricocheting off the ship's heavily fortified interior. The Ankar soldiers quickly returned fire, their weapons vibrating with power. Cortez led her team into a full sprint, zigzagging as the enemy unleashed a hail of fire. They reached the corner of the corridor, ducking behind a series of crates. The Ankar squad was closing in, and there was nowhere to hide. The humans had the element of surprise, but the Ankar were relentless, their tactics precise. The battle was becoming a war of attrition, and time was running out. "We need a way out," Dr. Alvarez shouted, scanning the walls for any escape route. "Leave that to me," Tanaka said, his eyes scanning the control panels on the side of the hallway. He darted toward a panel, quickly hacking into the ship's systems. He cursed under his breath as the security codes resisted. But he didn't stop. The human resolve was unyielding. "I've got it," he shouted. The walls of the corridor shifted. A hidden hatch opened up, revealing an emergency escape tunnel. It was cramped and narrow, but it was their best chance. "Go, go, go," Cortez urged, leading the way as the team bolted toward the hatch. Behind them, the Ankar soldiers were closing in, their weapons charged and ready. The team scrambled into the tunnel, barely avoiding the last round of fire. The hatch slammed shut behind them, sealing off the corridor as the team raced forward into the unknown. As they ran, the ship groaned under the weight of its crumbling systems. The Resistance's explosives were beginning to have their effect, destabilizing the ship's core. Each step the team took was a step closer to escape, but the mission wasn't over yet. The dreadnought was falling apart, and they had to make it to the extraction point before the ship tore itself apart. "We got 2 minutes left," Ward said, his voice tense. "We can't stop now. We need to get back to the ship. Now." They pushed forward with every ounce of energy they had left, the hum of the ship's weakening systems vibrating beneath their feet. As they neared the final stretch, an explosion echoed behind them, signaling that the dreadnought was beginning to break apart. The countdown to detonation was nearing its end. Finally, they reached the extraction point, a small docking bay where their escaped ship awaited. But as they rushed toward it, they saw the cold, calculating gaze of an Ankar officer standing in front of the ship's hatch. It was Har Kun, the Supreme Commander himself. His dark, impenetrable eyes locked onto the humans, his posture regal even in the face of disaster. "You really think you can win this?" Har Kun's voice was a mixture of contempt and disbelief. "You are nothing. My fleet will crush your rebellion." "Not today," Cortez said coldly, stepping forward. She motioned to Tanaka, who swiftly set the explosives to detonate. The countdown on the ship's screen was nearing its final seconds. A blast of energy from Sarkon's weapon tore through the air, but it was too late. As the team boarded the escape ship, the dreadnought's core detonated in a massive explosion. The shockwave reverberated through the space, sending the enemy flagship into disarray. In the chaos of the blast, Sarkon's cold expression faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of genuine uncertainty. The humans had done the impossible. They had destroyed the dreadnought, and in doing so, they had dealt a significant blow to the Ankar Empire. As the resistance ship rocketed away from the wreckage, leaving the burning remains of the flagship behind, General Steele's voice echoed through their comms. "This is just the beginning. The galaxy is ours for the taking." For the first time in a long while, humanity believed. They were no longer a species waiting for extinction. They were a force that would make the galaxy listen. And the Ankar, for the first time, were forced to confront the true might of Earth. The dreadnought's explosion echoed through the galaxy, a cataclysmic shockwave of destruction that resonated in every corner of the Ankar Empire. From the outer rim to the heart of their military strongholds, word of the loss spread quickly. Zarkun's flagship, once thought indestructible, was no more. The destruction was a blow to the Ankar's pride, their strategic command, and their invulnerability. On Earth, the resistance forces erupted into a mix of cheers and disbelief. Humanity had struck a devastating blow, but the victory, as sweet as it was only the first chapter of a long and grueling war. There was no time for celebrations. The next steps would be critical. The dreadnought was gone, but the Ankar fleet was still vast and powerful, and the Empire was determined to show that their dominance would not be easily toppled. General Steele stood at the center of the command room, looking at the map of the galaxy, his face grim. The victory over the dreadnought had been monumental, but it hadn't ended the war. The Ankar had resources and fleets scattered throughout the stars. If humanity didn't capitalize on this moment, the Ankar could regroup and retaliate in full force. "We've made a statement," Steele said, turning to his commanders. "But they'll come for us. They'll try to crush us before we can strike again." Dr. Sofia Alvarez, standing beside Steele, spoke up. "We've learned something critical. We've proven that the Ankar's reliance on their technology, their arrogance, is their biggest weakness. They believe their power is invincible. But now, they're uncertain. If we can exploit that uncertainty, we can turn the tide." Cortez, who had been silent for a moment, added, "We hit them hard where it hurts." But this wasn't just about the dreadnought. It was about the psychological impact. The Ankar will have a hard time understanding how humans, so inferior, managed to destroy their greatest chip. They'll be hunting for answers. But that doubt, that uncertainty, it's our weapon. Meanwhile, far beyond Earth's orbit, the Ankar were reeling. Sarkun stood in the council chamber, his expression unreadable as he gazed at the charred remnants of the dreadnought floating in space. His once unshakable confidence was now replaced by a simmering rage. His empire had been dealt a blow, one he never expected to come from such a primitive world. We underestimated them, Sarkun muttered to his closest advisors. We thought Earth was a backwater planet, incapable of real resistance. But now we've seen the truth. They are resilient. They are resourceful. And that is something we cannot afford to ignore. His lieutenant, a loyal Ankar officer named Kaltar, stood at attention. What is our next move, Commander? The dreadnought is gone, but our fleet remains. Zarquan's eyes narrowed. We will strike back, but not recklessly. We must crush their spirits. Send a message that no matter what they've done, it will mean nothing. We'll use their weakness against them. We will target their homeworld. We will show them that there is no escape from the Ankar. Back on Earth, Steele and his commanders were already planning their next steps. While their recent success had given humanity a momentary surge of hope, they knew the Ankar would strike back harder than ever before. This time, they would have to be ready. The war was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming their future. We need to strike before they can regroup, Steele said firmly. The Ankar will retaliate with everything they have. We'll have to hit their supply lines, their military strongholds. We take the fight to them now, or we risk losing everything. The next phase of humanity's resistance began with a series of daring raids. With the dreadnought out of commission, the Ankar's control over their fleets was weakened, giving Earth's forces a critical opening. The human resistance launched surgical strikes across the galaxy, targeting Ankar bases on distant planets, sabotaging supply ships, and cutting off vital resources. Every victory, no matter how small, disrupted the Ankar's carefully constructed war machine. But humanity's boldness came at a cost. The Ankar, though shaken, were not defeated. They responded with a devastating counteroffensive, targeting Earth's defenses with terrifying precision. It was clear the war was far from over. Through the chaos, General Steele maintained his focus. The Resistance's efforts had begun to draw the attention of other civilizations, some of whom had long been subjugated by the Ankar. Messages from distant star systems began to filter through. Species once oppressed by the Ankar were now watching Earth's fight with growing interest. We are not alone, Steele said, his voice low but determined. We've shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of, and now others will rise with us. As the war raged on, it became clear that humanity's greatest weapon was not just its ingenuity or resilience. It was the idea that Earth, once considered a backwater planet, was no longer just a target. It was a symbol. The galaxy was watching, and the fight for Earth's future had become a rallying cry for oppressed species across the stars. The Ankar's empire, once thought unbreakable, was beginning to unravel. But the greatest challenge lay ahead, taking the fight to the heart of the Ankar Empire itself. And for that, humanity would need every ounce of strength, courage, and unity they could muster. As the war raged on, Earth's resistance forces continued to gather momentum. Each battle, each small victory over the Ankar, sent a powerful message not just to the invaders, but to the entire galaxy. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. The dreadnought's destruction had broken the illusion of invincibility that the Ankar had carefully crafted, and now, across the stars, a new alliance was taking shape. On Earth, General Steele's command center had become a hub of intergalactic collaboration. Representatives from the free planets and systems, long oppressed by the Ankar, had begun to rally behind humanity's banner. The resistance had started to gain the support of alien species, some with advanced technology, others with unique resources that could turn the tide of war. Together, They formed a fragile but powerful coalition, united by a shared desire to overthrow the Ankar. The first of the Allied forces arrived in Earth's orbit in a procession of sleek, advanced warships. Among them was the Sivran Dominion, a race of warriors known for their expertise in ground combat. There was also the Velris Collective, an intelligent and resourceful species capable of outwitting even the most sophisticated defense systems. The addition of these forces gave the humans a crucial edge, allowing them to strike harder and faster than ever before. "Welcome to the fight," General Steele said as he addressed the leaders of the Noob Alliance via holographic transmission. "We've shown the Ankar they can bleed, but now we must show them they can fall." The Exivran leader, a towering figure with multiple cybernetic limbs, gave a nod of agreement. "The Ankar are not just an enemy. They are an ideology. We have lived under their heel for centuries. It's time we cut them down." The Alliance knew the stakes had risen exponentially. The Ankar, despite their losses, were not content to lick their wounds in silence. They were reorganizing, reinforcing their positions, and striking back with brutal force. The next phase of the war would be their hardest challenge yet. The time had come for the coalition to take the fight directly to the Ankar homeworld, to strike at the heart of their empire. The plan was bold, perhaps even suicidal, but it was their best chance. The Ankar Prime system was heavily fortified, its defenses almost impossible to breach. However, the human resistance, with the help of their newfound allies, had uncovered a weakness, a hidden vulnerability in the Ankar's central command network. If they could destroy this network, it would send shockwaves through the entire empire, crippling their ability to command their fleet and forces. General Steele stood before the map of the Ankar homeworld, his eyes scanning the critical data. "We have one shot at this," he said, his voice unwavering. "We hit their central command structure. We take down their communication hubs, disrupt their fleet coordination. Without that, the Ankar will fall into chaos. But we need to do it fast, before they can recover from the loss of the dreadnought and regroup." The Exivran leader stepped forward, his voice filled with determination. "We are ready. The Velris have already begun preparing their cyber infiltration teams. They will break through the Ankar's firewalls and open the way for your forces." But Steele wasn't blind to the dangers ahead. "We'll need a decoy fleet to draw their attention. The Exivran and Velris forces will hit their supply lines and keep the Ankar distracted. Meanwhile, our elite teams will infiltrate the command center. Time is everything. If we don't move fast enough, the Ankar will tighten their grip. We'll need to hit them harder than ever." The Alliance forces, though diverse in species and tactics, were united in purpose. Each species brought its own strengths to the table, combining their abilities in ways that were previously unthinkable. The Exivran's raw combat power, the Velris intelligence, and the humans' adaptability had created a war machine that could stand against even the mightiest of the Ankar. But Steele knew the greatest challenge would be in the final assault, taking down the heart of the Ankar Empire. If they succeeded, the Ankar would lose their cohesion and morale, and the remaining territories would likely fall into rebellion. But if they failed, Earth and all their allies would suffer unimaginable retaliation. The final preparation began, and a wave of anticipation washed over the coalition forces. Thousands of ships, human, Sivran, and Velris, were prepared to depart for the Ankar Prime system. As they gathered in the vast expanse of space, the weight of the mission was felt by every soldier and commander. General Steele stood at the helm of the flagship, staring out at the vast fleet of warships as they moved into formation. The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on him, but neither was the hope that burned brightly within him. Earth, once a mere speck in the cosmos, was now leading a coalition of races ready to challenge the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. "We've shown them we're not afraid," Steele said to his inner circle, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "But it's time we show them something even more powerful. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting to change the galaxy. And we will not stop until the Ankar Empire falls." The fleet surged forward, the stars seeming to part before them as they made their way toward the heart of the Ankar Empire. In the distance, the Ankar Prime system awaited. The final battle was upon them, and humanity would not bow. Not this time. The fleet, a sprawling armada of warships, hung in the void like a storm waiting to break. Thousands of ships, each brimming with soldiers, warriors, and hope, advanced toward the heart of the Ankar Empire. The human-led coalition was about to take the fight at the very doorstep of the enemy. The Ankar Prime system loomed ahead, its defenses formidable, its strength seemingly unassailable. But for the first time in years, the Ankar were the ones on the defensive. Their arrogance had been shattered, and humanity was leading the charge to end their reign. General Marcus Steele stood at the helm of the flagship, his hands clenched into fists. The gravity of what was about to happen hung over him like a weight. This was more than just a battle. It was the culmination of everything humanity had fought for. The dreadnought had been the first crack in the Ankar's facade, but this was the moment where everything changed. The war for Earth's survival, for freedom across the galaxy, would either end in victory or destruction. "We're in position," said Lieutenant Ethan Ward, his voice steady. "The Ankar's outer defense grid is coming online, but it's weak. They've spread themselves thin trying to cover the perimeter." Dr. Sofia Alvarez stood beside Steele, her face pale but resolute. "Their primary command center is located here." She pointed to a glowing red dot on the holographic map. "If we can infiltrate this stronghold and cripple their communications network, they won't be able to coordinate their fleet. The rest will crumble. But we have to get through their outer defenses first," Steele replied, his gaze scanning the holographic map. "The Ankar will know we're coming. They'll fight like animals cornered, but if we don't strike now, they'll recover from the dreadnought's loss. This is our only shot." The first wave of ships, a fleet of decoys led by the Sivran Dominion, began their assault. The Ankar responded as expected, with all the fury of a wounded animal. Blinding beams of energy shot across space, colliding with the Sivran ships. But the decoy fleet wasn't meant to win. They were meant to distract, to draw the Ankar's attention away from the real attack. The Velris Collective's fleet followed suit, using their cloaking technology to slip past the Ankar's line of defense and disrupt their communication systems, sowing confusion and chaos within the Ankar ranks. As the decoy and distraction forces engaged the Ankar's outer fleet, General Steele's flagship and the remaining coalition forces moved deeper into the system. They were not here to fight for long. They had one mission: to strike at the heart of the Ankar Empire. "Keep the pressure up," Steele ordered. "We can't afford to falter. We have one shot at this." The fleet pushed deeper into the Ankar Prime system, dodging blasts and navigating past crumbling defense stations. The Ankar's pride, their hubris, was now working against them. They had believed their empire invincible, but the cracks had already appeared. Each ship that fell was a testament to the fragility of their dominance. As the final push neared, Cortez and her elite infiltration team prepared to board the enemy's command center, located within a heavily fortified space station orbiting the Ankar homeworld. The plan was simple: infiltrate the station, plant the explosives in their central command core, and cripple their ability to coordinate their fleet. If they succeeded, the Ankar would be left in chaos, vulnerable to a full-on attack. Cortez, Tanaka, Ward, and Alvarez made their final preparations as the ship broke through the outer shell of the station's defense perimeter. The ship shook under the force of enemy fire, but the team was determined. They were ready. "Time to finish what we started," Cortez said, her voice cold with resolve. "We either make it out of here, or we give everything to ensure Earth's future." As the team descended into the depths of the enemy stronghold, the station's artificial gravity flickered, signaling the immense power struggles taking place within. Their stealth suits were a blur of movement, dodging automated security drones and Ankar soldiers. The tension was suffocating. They had seconds, mere seconds, to plant the explosives and escape before the entire station collapsed into oblivion. "Charges are set," Tanaka said, checking the devices one final time. "Now let's get out of here," Cortez replied. The team made their way to the extraction point, only to be intercepted by Xar Kun, the Anchor Supreme Commander. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto them as his voice boomed through the station's corridors. "You are fools," Xar Kun spat. "You've destroyed our flagship, you've crippled our defenses, but you will never defeat us. The Ankar are eternal. We are gods, and you are nothing." Cortez stood firm, her weapon drawn. "We're everything you've underestimated, and we're going to end your empire." With a final devastating exchange of fire, the team made their escape, and the countdown began. The Ankar homeworld's command structure would soon collapse. Within moments, the explosion tore through the heart of the station, sending shockwaves across the entire system. As the coalition fleet opened fire on the disoriented and disorganized Ankar forces, Xar Kun's words rang hollow. The Empire's final gasp of defiance was silenced as its fleet fell apart. And in that silence, humanity and its allies struck with all the force of a storm. The Ankar, once a galactic powerhouse, were no more. As General Steele watched from the bridge of the flagship, he knew this was the moment the galaxy had waited for. The Ankar Empire had fallen. The galaxy was free. And humanity had proven that they were not just survivors, they were conquerors.